Joining me now to look at the ongoing protests and blockades across the country and their impact on the economy is Perrin Beatty. He's the President and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce of Canada and a former federal cabinet minister. Mr. Beatty, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with, I'd like to get your response to what you heard from the Prime Minister today.
Well, I think what we're seeing from both the Ontario and federal governments is a sign that they're getting more serious about dealing with these issues before they compound further. Every single hour that goes by, more damage is done to our economy, and the damage that's done to individual Canadian families continues to grow.
How much damage are we seeing? Because we're seeing all sorts of different figures. For example, when it comes just to that Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, Detroit, and the cross-border trade.
It's impossible to say with certainty because, of course, a lot of the cargo that would be going across the Ambassador Bridge is being redirected elsewhere. But and we also can't measure something else, and that's that we're hearing, for example, that companies as far away as California being asked to load produce and to come to Canada are saying if there's no guarantee we can get across the border, that there may be another incident, we're not prepared to take the risk of taking the load. So the damage is severe. It's growing. We know that thousands of people have had their shifts canceled. We know that this has had a serious impact in terms of fresh produce and in terms of the ability to get goods and services across the border. But putting an exact figure on it's impossible. You say you're heartened by what you heard from the Prime Minister and from Ontario Premier Doug Ford with his declaration of a state of emergency in Ontario. But I mean, we've had 5 days of the interruption or the disruptions on the Ambassador Bridge. We've had 14 days in Coutts, Alberta. We've had 2 weeks here in Ottawa. How optimistic there's been a lot of talk. Are we actually going to see action, do you think? There has to be. We simply can't allow it to continue. What we're seeing is a breakdown of the rule of law. And I guess what I would say to our elected officials of every political party and from all levels of government is it's time to put aside the partisan squabbling. It's time to put aside the disputes over jurisdiction and to put Canadians first and to assert the fact that the rule of law that's there to defend all of our freedoms is absolutely critical, and it needs to be applied without fear or favor.
Okay, you alluded to the fact that there are, in addition to the actual trade that's going on or not going on, there's possibly deferred purchases and deliveries and things that are being deferred from American producers and consumers. But there's also a lot of talk about American protectionism and Buy American. Yes. We're already facing that. How seriously do you think this is going to put more wind in the sails of people in the States who are arguing for Buy American and Produce in America? I know my colleague Peter Van Dusen yesterday was talking to the head of the Canadian auto parts manufacturers, and he was talking about real fears of that.
I'm very worried about it. I'm struck, first of all, by the fact that this is damaging Canada's reputation globally. I've been receiving emails from people from around the world who say we almost never hear about Canada on our newscasts, but it's there all the time now, and not in a good way. And if you watch the American news, whether it's CNN or ABC, which I watched last night, they're leading off with what's happening at the border. And the message that people are getting is that Canada is an unreliable place to do business with. And what we're seeing is in Washington, where protectionist sentiment on both sides of the House is at record levels, we're getting people calling for manufacturing to be moved out of Canada and moved into the United States. So the long-term impact on Canada's economy may extend well beyond the actual blockade itself.
Okay, you've written an article in Policy magazine in which you say that 3 things are going to be necessary to address this economic crisis and these sort of rotating and growing protests and blockades. What are the 3 things that the government needs to do, or governments need to do?
Well, I think it's very important, first of all, that they send a clear message that the rule of law will be respected. Second, we need to make sure right now that we're hardening and protecting our infrastructure in other areas. There's a possibility that these blockades that we've seen could metastasize to other areas as well. We already have them in Coutts, Alberta. We have them in Emerson, Manitoba. We've seen the actions against the airport in Ottawa yesterday, and of course there's the blockade in downtown Ottawa as well. And we've seen demonstrations in places like Toronto and Quebec City last weekend. So there's a real concern here that people seeing the vulnerability of our logistics system may choose to simply disobey the law and to try to do damage on our ability to keep our economy functioning. We need to deal with that. We need to make sure that we've taken every appropriate action to go to the courts and make sure that the police have the authority to act and that it's clear that they have that. We need to send a message that the police have our backs, all of the elected officials' backs, that all of the elected officials have their backs. And it's very important for us to ensure that they have the supplies that they need in terms of personnel and equipment to be able to ensure that the law is enforced.
Okay, without being too much of a pessimist, though we're in an era of, we've seen now rapid mobilization through the internet and very volatile people, in these particular protests, attracting very diverse groups and being ready to be mobilized. You say we have to have enforcement. We have the legal framework already, but do we have the resources if we have this kind of concerted effort to disrupt the economy?
Well, and that's obviously a concern, and it's a discussion that we need to have after all of this is over. It was 2 years ago that we saw small groups of militants across the country severing our rail lines across the country and creating chaos then. Now we're getting a totally different group who are attacking areas of infrastructure that are critical to the Canadian economy and to Canadian families' well-being. We need to ask ourselves, are there further measures that we need to take to protect our infrastructure in the future? But as things stand today, the critical point is this, that we need to ensure that the message is sent clearly, that our elected officials at all levels believe in the rule of law. They will make available any resources at all levels of government to ensure that order is maintained and that the Canadian economy is able to function effectively and that Canadians can go back about their ordinary lives.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a blunt question. You used to be in the political arena for a good 20 years, former federal minister. You know how this works, and a former conservative. You have the federal Conservative Party who is playing footsie with endorsing these protests. You have provincial premiers who are galloping ahead, removing vaccine mandates. This all would seem, it's being interpreted as emboldening the protesters. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I don't want to get into any one political party. What I would say to every elected official at every level of government, irrespective of political party, the fundamental guarantee of our rights and freedoms as Canadians is the fair and even-handed application of the rule of law. We spoke out 2 years ago when small groups of militants were attempting to sever our rail system in Canada. Exactly the same principles apply here. No small group has the ability to declare themselves beyond the law and to try to create paralysis within Canada, to hold Canadians to ransom for their political goals. Okay. And all of our elected officials have a responsibility to make it clear that they can't support that.
Okay, Perrin Beatty, I want to thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you.